In 1877, the richest man in America died. His estate was worth about $105 million, more than the entire US Treasury held at the time. 96 years later, 120 of his descendants gathered for a family reunion. Not one of them was a millionaire. Here's the number that should stop you. Had that fortune simply been left invested and mostly left alone, it would have been worth roughly $5 billion by that reunion, about $40 million for every person in the room. They had nothing. It wasn't a market crash. It wasn't the estate tax. The tax bill is everyone's first guess. I know how that sounds. Let me earn it. The Vanderbilts were destroyed by the absence of something the families who keep their money all share, and it quietly drains ordinary wealth today too. So let's build it. The structures that decide whether money survives you and the math on each one. Ask most people why family fortunes disappear, and they'll say taxes. The government takes half when you die, then again when your kids die, and after a few generations there's nothing left. It's a clean story. It is also, for almost everyone watching this, wrong. Here's the current law, and it matters. As of a 2025 change, the federal estate tax exemption is $15 million per person, $30 million for a married couple, and it is now permanent, indexed to rise with inflation. Below that line, the federal estate tax is not reduced. It is zero. A family can pass $15 million per parent to the next generation, and the federal government takes nothing. So, unless you plan to die with more than $15 million to your name, the estate tax is not the thing that unravels what you've built. For the overwhelming majority of people watching, it never enters the picture at all. And yet families at every level, $100,000, $1 million, $20 million, watch their money evaporate within 2 or 3 generations anyway. There is one honest asterisk here. Around a dozen states levy their own estate or inheritance tax, and a few of them start biting far below the federal line, sometimes as low as $1 or $2 million. So depending on where you live, a smaller state-level bill can appear much earlier than the federal one ever would. But even there, the rates are a fraction of what most people fear, and a modest state tax is still not what empties a great fortune. The structural bleed we are about to walk through that's the puzzle. If it isn't the tax man, what is it? The answer is that wealth rarely dies from a single blow. It bleeds out through a handful of structural gaps most people never think to close because they assume those things are for the ultra-rich, or for lawyers, or for later. They are none of those. What follows are the systems the families who actually keep their money have used quietly for a century. And the reason they work has nothing to do with how much you start with. It comes down to math you can check on a single page. So let's start with that math, because everything else is built on top of it. There is one number that decides whether a pile of money is temporary or permanent, and almost no one has ever taught it. Take any amount, call it your estate. It earns some return each year after inflation. Let's use 5%, a reasonable long-run figure for a sensibly invested pool. Now the family spends. As long as what the family pulls out each year is less than what the money earns, the pile grows. Forever. The moment the family pulls out more than it earns, a countdown begins. Not a slow, forgiving leak. A countdown with a fixed end date. Here's what that looks like with real numbers. $2 million earning 5% throws off $100,000 a year. If the family lives on $100,000 a year, that money is, for every practical purpose, immortal. It funds one generation after another and never shrinks. But watch what happens when the family spends just a little more. At $120,000 a year, only 20% over the line, that same $2 million runs completely dry in 37 years. Less than a single lifetime. Push it to $150,000 and it's gone in 23. At $200,000, double the sustainable figure. The entire fortune hits zero in 15 years. One generation, and the money that was supposed to last forever is a memory. And this scales in both directions. Take $1 million at the same 5%, and the sustainable line is $50,000 a year. Live on 50 and it is permanent. Spend 60, again, just 20% over, and that million runs dry in the same 37 years. What matters is the percentage you overspend by, not the size of the pile. Go a fifth past your line, and whether you started with 1 million or 100, the countdown runs the exact same shape. The size of the pile only changes how long the countdown runs. A smaller family sees it in a decade. A Gilded Age fortune can absorb the overspending for the better part of a century before it finally empties. But the direction is identical, and it is set entirely by one comparison: what the money earns versus what the family spends. Cross that line, and no fortune is ever large enough to survive it. That is the entire tragedy of generational wealth in a single sentence. And it is exactly what happened to the family from the start of this video. I promised you it wasn't the estate tax, and it wasn't. It was this. They spent lavishly and for decades far past what even $100 million fortune could earn in a year. So every system that follows exists to do one of two things: keep the family on the right side of that line, or protect the pile from the events that yank it across the line without warning. The first system is the one nearly everyone gets slightly wrong, so I want to be careful and honest about what it actually does. The families who keep wealth do not hand assets to their children as personal property. They place the assets inside a structure: a trust, a holding company, a family entity. And the children receive a relationship to that structure, not a stack of shares with their name printed on them. Now, the myth is that this beats dilution, that splitting a fortune among heirs is what destroys it, and that keeping everything in one entity somehow prevents that. Let me kill that myth because it isn't true, and this channel does not run on things that aren't true. $2 million held in a single pool, spending at its limit, and that same $2 million split into 3 equal shares of about $667,000 each, with each heir spending proportionally reach zero at the exact same moment. The math does not care whether the money sits in one account or 3. Splitting on its own is not the killer. So why does the structure matter? For 3 reasons that are real, and that the math genuinely supports. First, discipline. When 3 heirs each own their slice outright, they each spend to their own lifestyle, and no one is watching the total. Independently, quietly, their combined spending drifts above what the whole pool earns. And the countdown starts without anyone ever deciding it should. A single structure with rules forces the family to spend as one, measured against one number, so the total stays under the line on purpose instead of by luck. Second, access. A large pool earns more than small ones do. It reaches investments a single heir's share can't touch. It pays lower fees as a percentage, and it stays diversified. Break $2 million into thirds, and each heir, managing alone, tends to earn less. Drop a $600,000 shares return from 5% down to 3%. And its survival window shortens right along with it. Keeping the capital together keeps the return up, and a higher return holds the family further from the line. Third, protection. Assets held personally are exposed to lawsuits, to divorces, to creditors, to one heir's bad decade. Assets held properly inside a structure are insulated, so a single family member's disaster does not reach through and drain the whole. You have seen this at the largest scale. The family behind the world's biggest retailer does not hold its stake as a stack of personal shares divided among relatives. It holds the bulk of it through a single family entity, concentrating control, spreading the benefit, and keeping the whole intact across generations. The same principle scales all the way down. If the only real asset you own is a house, the question is identical. Does it pass as personal property to be split and squabbled over, or does it pass inside a structure with rules? Which brings us to the second system, and a distinction that quietly decides the fate of most family businesses. Ownership is not the same as control, and confusing the two is how good assets get destroyed. Picture a business with 3 equal partners, each of them free to sell their third whenever they like. It feels fair. It is a time bomb. The day one partner sells to an outsider, the other 2 are suddenly in business with a stranger, someone who votes their way, blocks decisions, or forces a direction the founders never wanted. Worse than that, because everyone knows the stake is liquid, that it can be sold, seized, or leveraged, the whole business becomes a target. A creditor knows there is something to grab. A lawsuit knows there is something to win. A divorce knows there is something to divide. Visible, accessible liquidity invites every one of them to the table. The fix is not to make selling impossible. Sometimes a family member genuinely needs out, and trapping them creates its own disaster. The fix is to make the important things difficult, but never impossible. Transfer restrictions do exactly that. They say you cannot simply hand your stake to an outsider on a whim. A right of first refusal says that if you do want to sell, the family gets the first chance to buy you out, at a fair price, before anyone outside it. The partner who truly needs liquidity still gets liquidity. The stranger with a checkbook never gets in the door. And notice what this quietly solves. The most common reason families are forced to sell a good asset is that they need cash, and selling looks like the only way to raise it. But cash is rarely the real problem. Access to cash is the real problem. This is true at every level, including the very top. When one of the most famous entrepreneurs in the world moved to buy a major social network, he did not liquidate his company to do it. He borrowed against the stock he already held, kept the asset, and pulled the cash out against it. You and I can run the same move on a smaller scale, borrowing against a portfolio rather than selling it. A family with the right structure builds that access in deliberately, so it never has to sell the very thing that makes it wealthy just to raise money. The third system is the one that would have saved the most family fortunes in history, and it costs nothing but the decision to write things down. Picture two brothers who inherit a company worth $5 million. No written rules came with it, only shared ownership and good intentions. One brother wants to reinvest the profits and grow the thing. The other wants his cash out now. Neither is wrong, exactly. They simply want different things, and nothing on paper says how to settle it. Then life happens. A divorce enters the picture. A creditor comes calling, with no rules for how the company handles a member who needs money, no mechanism for a loan, no path to a fair buyout. The only lever left to pull is the biggest one: sell the whole company. And a company sold under pressure on somebody else's timeline never fetches what it is worth. Suppose that forced sale brings 60 cents on the dollar. I'll flag that as an illustrative figure, not a law of nature, but a realistic one for a distressed sale. $5 million becomes $3. $2 million, 40% of everything, evaporates. Not because the business was bad, but because there were no rules for a bad moment. The company could have stayed whole. It could have kept compounding. Instead, it was liquidated to settle a fight that a single page of rules would have prevented. That page has a name: a family constitution. Instead of handing heirs raw ownership, you hand them assets governed by rules. Rules that spell out how a member takes a distribution, how they can borrow against their share, how someone who needs out gets bought out fairly. And above all, that no single person can force a sale in a hard moment. In sports, the rules exist for fairness. In a family, the rules exist so that you do not lose the game to your own worst week. There are 3 good times to write those rules. The best is when you first set the assets up, because how something begins is usually how it continues. The second is when everyone is calm, never in the middle of the very crisis the rules are meant to handle. And the third is right now, today, because nothing durable was ever built without first being written down. Every system so far has been about the money. The last one is about the people. And it is the one families skip most, usually to their ruin. Here is a small heresy. Think twice before you pay your kids to do chores. It seems harmless, even responsible. But it teaches a quiet lesson. That work is the unpleasant thing you endure in order to get paid. That effort and drudgery are the same word. That lesson compounds. A child who learns that work is punishment grows into an heir who sees the family's money as an escape from work rather than a responsibility to steward it. And an heir who wants to escape work is precisely the heir who spends past the line. The families who last do something different. They do not pay for chores. They build the skills that create value. When a child is interested in something, anything, you route that interest into a small, real project, a little business, a first investment made with real stakes and real consequences. The lesson flips entirely. Money is what you earn by creating something the world actually wants, and managing money well is itself a skill you practice, not a windfall you receive. There are 3 things worth passing down here, and they matter in this order. First, passion. Let them care about something real, because genuine interest is what keeps them in the game at all. Second, skills. Not chores, but the ability to build, to work, to create value. And right alongside it, the specific skill of handling money, so they can steward what they inherit instead of merely consuming it. And third, character. The understanding that there is something larger than yourself, which is where real generosity comes from. A generation trained in those three things can hold what it is handed. A generation handed money, and nothing else will do exactly what untrained heirs have always done: spend past the line and wonder later where it all went. So let's go back to that reunion table. 120 descendants of the richest man in the country, and not a millionaire among them. Run the arithmetic forward, and it is almost impossible to believe. That original fortune, simply left invested at a conservative return, should have been worth around $4.5 billion by the time they sat down together. And that